Please join me in giving a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, Julia Davis.
Thank you. I have this for you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk to you about ethical leadership and how that applies to my career and also my opportunity to work for what I feel is one of the most ethical companies I've ever had the privilege of working for, and that being Aflac. So just to give you a little bit background on me, to help you understand a little bit how I got to where I am. I started out, and this is me. Oh, yes, I know. Somebody thought this would be cute to show me as a child, and how I got started in this process is, for me, an experience I had really at a young age was recognizing I was fascinated by science and technology. And I can remember when I got the opportunity, now I'm going to date myself, of actually watching on TV Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. So yes, that gives you some idea of my age. But I knew that I wanted to be an astronaut. And I went to my father and I said to him, Dad, this is something I really want to do. What is it going to take for me to get there? How am I going to get there? And most fathers, I think in the 60s, probably wouldn't have been too thrilled about hearing their daughter wanted to be an astronaut. And they most likely would not have been inclined to encourage them to do so. But my dad didn't. He didn't think that that was not a possibility. He encouraged me. He taught me a lot about science and math. His background, he himself was in technology, and he made sure I had ample opportunity to learn all about it at every step of the way and to start to play around with electronics and play around with computers. And as a matter of fact, I recently had the opportunity to clean out his closet and found some of my old computers, TRS-80s, compact luggables, and one of the original IBM ThinkPads that was about this thick. So pretty old stuff. But even then, I still knew that there was more I wanted to do in my life. And I thought, well, OK, they really helped me get into the astronaut program. I probably should go into the Air Force. And I need to learn to fly a plane. So at 16, I went to my father and I said, I really want to learn to fly a plane. I think this is something that's going to help me get a scholarship, get me into the Air Force, and help me with my dream of becoming an astronaut. And again, not many fathers would say, hey, I really don't want you to learn to fly a plane at the age of 16. My father, especially since I grew up in New Jersey, where you can't actually drive a car until you're 17. So here I am at 16 wanting to learn to fly a plane before I learned to drive a car. But once again, my father, very tolerant, said, great, I think that's a great opportunity. I'll take you to learn to fly. And sure enough, I did learn to fly a plane before I learned to drive a car. So off I went to college, and I actually got a scholarship in Air Force ROTC. And I decided to go to Lehigh University. It was somewhat close to home. I lived in New Jersey, wanted to get a degree in engineering. And I looked at the programs that they had. And I decided I thought engineering physics might be something that I would be very good at, because I really couldn't hone in quite on what I wanted my major to be. And I figured physics would give me a broad background in doing pretty much anything. And again, I thought this was something I'd have to go on to pursue an advanced degree, and that would be something I would pursue a career in. But as you can see, I'm wearing glasses. And the needs of the Air Force and glasses, part of the challenge is you have to be able to see to be able to fly. That didn't work out so well for me. I did go into the Air Force, but when they were looking at my background, I applied for my first position, hoping I would get to go to NASA, and at least I could be a mission specialist maybe. I could work on a payload and be involved in that. But I didn't get into NASA. The needs of the Air Force at the time was, hey, this new thing called computers is out there, and let's take everybody with an engineering degree, and we're going to make them all computer people. So I wound up going into programming. That's how I got my start into technology, is I started working on doing computer simulations and figuring out, how do you do staffing models for a variety of different scenarios in the military. And I learned a lot. It was a great opportunity, great experience. It taught me a lot about leadership. It taught me a lot about ethics. It taught me a lot about how do you take that and translate that to the workplace. And during this time, I also worked on getting my master's degree, because I knew that that was something I wanted to get into leadership, and that was going to help me get to that next level. And about 5 years after I was into the service, it was at a point when the technology industry was really booming. And I recognized that there was a huge opportunity for me to really leapfrog and get out there and take advantage of my background, get into the business, and start working for a for-profit opportunity. And that's what I did. I left the service, and I started out in a company, an engineering company, managing a team of developers building software to support that engineering company. And it was a great opportunity. And it taught me a lot about what you do in business. How do you take those leadership skills and apply them to business? And everywhere I went throughout my career, I think I did a classic maneuver, which a lot of people in technology did, was I didn't stay with the same company. I did move around a lot. And part of that reason for movement was the opportunity to get to the next level, to move up in my career and take chances and try different things. And that's what I did. It helped me move up to different positions. And I never said no to anything that was presented to me and I was asked to take. It was always about trying the next thing, taking a challenge. Don't be afraid. Take leaps of faith. You may not know it, but I sure was going to figure it out. And as I moved throughout my career, the challenges I faced is sometimes I worked for some pretty good companies, and sometimes I didn't work for very good companies. I really questioned their ethics. I questioned about some of the things that they were doing. Was this the right thing to do? And I have to say that, everywhere you go is going to have a different circumstance and a different situation. But I was very lucky. 2.5 years ago, I had an opportunity to come to Aflac. And since I've been in Aflac, I've learned a lot, even more so than I thought I would ever learn. You never stop learning. That's one of the keys to, I think, your career when you're looking at it. And when you want to move up the ladder is always take it as an opportunity to learn. And Aflac's taught me a lot. And I want to share a little bit with you about some of the things about ethical leadership that I've learned along the way. And some of the things that Aflac's also taught me about ethical leadership. I think we've seen a lot of instances, and I'm going to go through a couple of them here that are a little scary about ethics in the leadership. And some of the things that I know I just question and shake my head at how do these companies survive? How do they live with themselves when they go through this process? And one of them that comes to mind recently is I look at Volkswagen. I'm sure many of you are aware of that so-called software fix or patch that they had that allowed them to be able to fake out the emissions testing process. They knew when they were being emissions tested that they could trigger the results to say that they weren't emitting as much dioxide as they said they were. Who would program a system to do that? What kind of thought process? I mean, yeah, you want to be able to have a car that people love that's get up and go, but I don't think I personally could live with myself if I made that as a programmer a recommendation that this is a way that people will want to buy our cars. We still have a reputation for being fast, but we're going to destroy the environment in the process. And I guarantee you that a lot of the leadership probably wasn't aware of this. If they were, I think based on the numbers, they probably got what they deserved. Look at what they lost, $46 billion in fines, 50% of a stock drop. There's a cost to being unethical, and it affects the bottom line. So that short-term fix of getting people interested in your product and getting you up there and pushing your product had long-term repercussions that the company's going to have to recover from. Same thing for Bernie Madoff. I think most of us hopefully had a chance to see the recent two-night special they had on Bernie Madoff, but this was a horrible experience what this guy went through, what he did to people. Again, all through the process, people liked his style, his way of leadership, his engaging manner in convincing people he's taking care of their money. All the while, he was never doing anything he said he did. He wasn't investing their money. He was just moving it around in a big Ponzi scheme, paying people off that were asking for it, and then moving on and collecting more money and spending it however he saw fit. 16,000 investors were filing claims against Madoff. And the worst part is all this is even though checks and balances were put in place, they didn't follow through. I think one of the things that shocked me the most about this is he's sitting there in a meeting with auditors, and they ask him what his trading account number is. A simple thing, check to see if he's actually conducting trades and investing people's money. And the answer was he just made up a number. He didn't have a trading account number. He just made it up. And they never checked it because he was confident they relied on him as an individual, not on the statistics. However, we have another example of unethical leadership. Martin Shkreli. I don't know how many of you know him about what he did when he acquired a drug for AIDS. And he jacked the price up by over 5,000%. Huge backlash from doing that. And guess what happened? They actually investigated him. Instead of ignoring him, it caught up with him. And they found out he himself was running his own form of a Ponzi scheme and got caught and hauled off to jail. And the irony in this is his defense attorney actually decided to say, hey, I'm going to jack my hourly rate up. I know I was charging $1,000 an hour. I'm going to charge you $60,000 an hour. And he didn't get the irony of this. He said, I'm being gouged. Didn't get the irony. Okay. But these are the kind of things that you've got to be careful of. And as a company and in leadership, it's critical that you make sure you're not focusing on trying to make money, but on trying to do the right thing for your company. I mean, that's one of the things I'd have to say I learned in my career, that it's not always about yourself. That your success can come from when you focus on your company and doing good for your company, and you focus more on the job you're in. You'd be surprised at what opportunities come up for you. This is an example, just to give you some oversight on what ethics can do for you. The Ethisphere, world's most ethical companies. The blue line you see here is an example of companies that show up on their list. They outperform what you see from the metrics related to average companies in the stock market. So they're significantly outperforming them compared to other peers in their group. Ethical companies do better. And that's something that Aflac has taken to heart, and that's something I personally have taken to heart, that I know that the investors that are investing in my company are expecting me to deliver results ethically. And the stock proves that that's the case. So how does that relate to what we're doing from a recruiting perspective? I think one of the challenges we've recognized at Aflac is we're a 60-year-old insurance company. We've been around a long time. We've been in Columbus, Georgia, small town. Even though what people don't realize is a good portion of our business is in Japan. 3/4 of our business is based in Japan. But some of the things that we look at in trying to recognize what's important to people, work-life balance is one of the top career goals. And I can tell you, as a boomer, that was not one of mine. I think when I started out, my top career goal was actually make the most money I can. Ironic, huh? But that drives a lot of what you see in some of the ethics in business. And I think as I went throughout my career, I started to recognize, there's something to be said for work-life balance. It's not always about how much you're making or where you are, how high up you are. A lot of it's about, do you have a quality of life? And I think we have to recognize that and appreciate that. And I know that's something that's been a challenge across the multiple generations as we work together. How do we understand this? And how do we incorporate this in what we do? And recognize that taking care of your employees and working with your employees and understanding their motivation and values is equally important as taking care of your customers. So I think some of these factors that we look at and what's important to us are all part of elements that we came up with as a value proposition for our company. And I think it's important that companies do this, is understand that they need to create what they think are important values and put standards around how you live by them. As a company, I know it's important to me. It was one of the factors I looked at when I went to Aflac. I'd been living in Atlanta for a number of years, and it was very hard for me to imagine moving out of Atlanta and going to Columbus, Georgia. But one of the things that drew me to Aflac that just blew me away was the fact that it was the first time I felt they walked the talk, that ethics was an important factor in what we do and making sure it's incorporated in all aspects of how we do our jobs. So the good news about what I found is Aflac actually has been on Ethisphere's most ethical companies for 9 years in a row, the only insurance company to do so, which is pretty amazing. I think a lot of it's due to one-day pay, which I'm going to talk a little bit about that and that whole philosophy and how we got there. But this is kind of an overview of our core values, the things that are important to us at Aflac. and what is expected of every one of their leaders to embrace, as well as their employees at all levels of the company. We need to be able to do that. And just kind of walking you through a couple of them, the communicate regularly is critical. We need to have that ability to be able to discuss things in an open forum, not do it via email, not do it via phone, and not do it via text. That sometimes there's something to be said for having that personal communication where you can read the body language, you can see what's going on. And one of the things that I had to do in my organization when I first got there is I think we got into a mindset of we were hidden in our own little building all by ourselves. We never talked to our other customers in the company. We waited till they sent us an email with this list of things that we want, and we piled it on the stack of everything else that needed to be worked on. And we get to it when we could. Sometimes things would move up on the list, sometimes things would move down. There was no logic or standard for how that happened. And we had to go about getting resources assigned to start to work directly with our customers, to go to where our customers worked and sit down with them and say, okay, let's look at what you asked for. What's your number one priority? What's the thing that's most important to you? Have that honest conversation. And they were able to come back to us and say, okay, I get it. You can't do everything all at once. I understand your capacity. You have a finite number of things you can do in a given time frame. Let's focus on these. Get those done. Our customer sat scores for my team went from 40% to 55% in the span of 2 years, just by implementing this simple change, communicate. Another one is respond immediately. And we use this example because I said to you earlier that 3/4 of our business is in Japan. 1 in 4 households in Japan has our products. When the tsunami hit, it caused huge issues for the whole infrastructure and the whole company and our employees and our customers. We recognized that we needed to be able to understand that they had challenges. And we gave them reprieves on making payments on their premiums because they had other issues to deal with. We still continued to service their claims and still continued to address their needs. And we did everything we could to donate a significant amount of money to help them with this cause. We didn't wait until everybody else did it. We were one of the first to sign up with a large check to the Red Cross to help these people get back on their feet. Next one, I'm going to use one of my guys, Tim Callahan, who's not here unfortunately today. But we have one called Know Your Stuff. And the reason why this is important is a lot of times in leadership, people don't want you to think that you don't know what you're doing. You don't want to reveal your holes, your areas where you're not really strong. That's probably the worst possible thing you can do. You got to recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at. And what I'm not good at is I'm not good at security. I realized pretty quickly I needed to go hire the best person I could find that could do this job. And I actively sought out and recruited them and looked for someone that I know who could run this and take point on it. And I also recognized that because the company didn't quite understand the importance of this role, they wanted it to report directly to me. But I also knew that at some point this position needed to be elevated up to a peer level of mine. So I didn't go in there with any guise that, oh great, this person's reporting to me and now he's going to want to move up a level. How can I prevent that? I didn't worry about protecting my turf. I recognized I have a hole, I'm going to recruit someone, and I'm going to make sure he has the cover he needs to help him accomplish what needs to get done to ensure we're not breached like Anthem. And then I'm going to make sure he gets promoted so I can keep him, promoted up to my level. So you have to overcome some of those fears of worrying about that you're never going to know everything. Nobody knows everything. But the way you can build the best team possible is find the experts in your field and bring them to your organization and make sure that you give them what they need to be successful in their jobs. And don't protect the turf. So one of the things that also is vitally important is to make sure we treat everyone with care and respect. It's not just about the customers, it's also about our employees. And one of our memorable quotes from our chairman that he learned from his own father, and this is a picture of our 3 founders of Aflac, 3 brothers that built this company, is if you treat your employees right, they will take care of the company. We're very actively involved in making sure our employees get everything they need to be able to do their job. We celebrate them with an Employee Appreciation Week, unlike anything I have ever seen. I had literally no idea what this was all about until I got to Aflac. I mean, we've all been to the office Christmas parties, but This is so much more than that. This is all about the people. And they take it seriously. I don't travel during this week. I am there every day meeting with all of my employees, making sure they know how much I appreciate the work that they're doing and that I value everything they do, because we wouldn't be successful without them. So again, that's another critical value that I encourage companies to have. Your problem is my problem. This is critical for me because when I get phone calls or my people get phone calls and they're asking about a problem, it is so easy to say, that's not my problem, let me hand you over to someone who can take care of that. That's the worst thing we can do. People want to know that you care about their issue and you want to deal with it. I had a situation where I had a project manager that was putting in a major implementation of a system for our customer service center. And part of what they did is it was a call system that when you call in, the person calling in, the idea is to try and get as much information as possible so it can get routed to the right person to respond to the question. And the IVR system that we put in, we overcomplicated it first. I think we put everything you can think of, and it was one of those IVRs that we all hate to deal with where we start screaming, agent, agent. We had one of those. So we went back and we said, okay, let's simplify it and make it easier to do. And one of the things that the customer had come up with is there a way that we can let people know we're working on the problem and create something creative that sounds like we're addressing this quickly. So they found a sound that sounded like a cadence that they liked. Well, the project manager could have easily shipped it off to someone on his team to deal with. But what he did is he was the kind of guy that liked playing with music. And he actually did a recording of his own self-typing that made the kind of cadence and sound that he wanted. And he went out of his way to build that actual file that they needed to put out on the IVR to be able to show that sound. So it wasn't taking it all the way down and passing the buck. It was all about fix the problem when you know about it. Deal with it directly. I get calls all the time, and believe me, I don't pass the buck. I make sure that I have an answer to them and I get back to them. That's critical to how we do business. Shoot straight's another one. I think we've all heard this phrase, and I know my CEO says it all the time, bad news doesn't get better with age. Is we've got to make sure that we're doing the right thing when there are issues that happen in the company. We tell the truth, we're upfront about it, and we don't try and sugarcoat it. Because there's nothing worse than when you're in a meeting and you're listening to someone and you're trying to understand what is it that they're saying to you. You want to be able to get to the point. Do you like this idea? Do you not like this idea? Don't tap dance around it. You're wasting my time and theirs. Another example of what we did for shooting straight is I go back to the tsunami incident. Some of you may have been aware that voice of the Aflac duck, when you squeak it, it goes, Aflac. That voice was done by Gilbert Gottfried. Right after the tsunami incident, he tweeted some very inappropriate comments about what happened in Japan. We didn't appreciate that. We didn't wait, we didn't negotiate, we didn't talk. He was terminated immediately. It's not the kind of behaviors or values that we want to deal with. And we quickly put out there on YouTube, we auditioned over 12,000 people, got a response back, and actually hired someone from one of those audition tapes. That's now Dan McTeague, who's now doing the voice today on all your ducks that you picked up. If you haven't, they're out there, so feel free to take one. And cover your customer is another one. We recently won the J.D. Power Award for our customer service center. And a lot of people don't realize what it goes into getting that award. It isn't just about having a great technology system and using the IVR. Again, as I said, we overcomplicated the IVR. That's not good either. You can have all the great technology in the world, but if it's not really what the customer wants to deal with, you failed. So we learned that lesson the hard way. Our customer service center, when their people are calling in, these are people that are sick and in some cases dying. Or their family, they're dealing with family members. They're at the worst possible times in their life and what they're facing. They want someone to help them figure out how to pay their bills. And that's what our customer service center does every day, recognizing that we're not going to stall the payment of their bills. We want to get that money to them and we want to get it to them quick. That's what our whole premise and our whole motto is about as a company. That's what makes us unique, is it's not about hanging on to the cash as long as possible. It's about helping our customers out in their time of need. That's the kind of values of companies that you got to look for when you go through looking for your career opportunities. Find a company that matches you. This one example I'm going to give you, we've all seen the ads about one-day pay, and it is an example of all the values that I talked about here, my own personal experiences with it. I can tell you that some of the things that I learned is we were paying claims within 4 days, the best in the industry. Again, our focus is on the value of delivering to our customers in their time of need. Well, there was a whole bunch of car ads going around at the time. You know, they were saying, hey, that guy does it in 15 days, or 15 minutes. I can do it in 10 minutes. So our CEO kept thinking, well, what's going to happen when our competition starts to say, hey, I can do it in 3 days, I can do it in 2 days, I can do it in 1. And he decided we're going to do it in 1 day. Well, as an IT person, I can tell you, I just about panicked. I'm thinking, oh no, I can barely handle 4 days. How are we going to do it in 1 day? So our head of claims and myself kind of were sweating and thinking, how are we going to do this? So we get in a meeting with the CEO, and he's telling us, okay, this is my vision, this is what I want to do, and I want to get this launched as quickly as possible, what it's going to take. Well, we had met with the teams, we figured out, you know, with all the things that we have on our plate and all the stuff that's going on right now, we can get it done in 18 months. Great. That didn't go over too well with the CEO, but he didn't say anything. So we get out of the meeting, and next thing you know, I get a phone call, and it's the CEO, and he's telling me, let's go to lunch. Okay. I'm getting called to the woodshed, as we say here in the South. I'm going to be hearing about this. And sure enough, I quickly pull together my team, and I'm thinking, we've got to figure out, you guys have got to come up with an answer between now and the time I come back, get to lunch, and text me quickly. How are we going to do this in less than 18 months? And we sat down at lunch, we talked about it, and luckily I had gotten a call back from my folks, actually the project manager, and he said, you know how we do it? Shut down all the noise. He shot straight with me. He didn't try and tell me the answer I wanted to hear, which was hire more people, get more money. It was shut down all the noise. It's stop working on all these other #1 priorities and make this our sole focus of how we get things done. We work on nothing else. And that's what I did. I told the CEO, I said, that's the only way I can do it. I said, you've got to tell the head of claims, you've got to tell the head of operations, I am not going to do anything else but this project. And you're not going to ask for anything else, right? You're going to let me have time to get this done. I'll get it done in 6 months. And that's what happened. Our team got it done. They delivered in 6 months on what is very old systems and technology, trust me. It's not like it is today. We're operating with platforms that are 30 years old. They've been around for a long time. So we were asked to do the near impossible, and we did it. And we were able to launch ahead of schedule and actually have enough time to get all the kinks worked out in time to be able to announce it at the Grammys. And a year ago, that's what we did. We announced to the Grammys and put the new commercial out there, advertising our one-day pay. And our customer sat scores shot up. How many companies do you know actually want to pay people? Huge values, huge ethics. That's one of our core principles. I mean, the hard part for my CEO is I remember Allstate was about to come out with an announcement that said they could pay same day. And it was in their property and casualty business, their auto business. And my CEO was upset, how can they do that? And I said, well, Dan, they have new systems. I need new systems. And the funny thing was, it wasn't that they could do it. A lot of times they didn't want to do it. And I worked for a company that was like that. I worked for a company, we had a system that could pay the same day, but we didn't want to do it. We wanted to hang on to that money as long as possible because we were making interest on the float. Okay. I tell you, it's much nicer working for a company that wants to pay. It's not much nicer working for a company that the customers like you. And you go to places and people actually like talking to you instead of yelling at you about why you haven't paid their claim. So some of the things that I've learned over my career that I kind of want to share with you, I talked a little bit about. I never looked for that next opportunity. A lot of times it sought me out. And a lot of it was because I was focused on the job that I was doing, not the job that I wanted. I made sure to share information. I didn't try and hoard it. So I made sure to train my successor. You're never going to get promoted if you don't have somebody ready to step in and fill your shoes. You're never going to get that next opportunity if you're the only one that knows anything about it. Those were the kinds of things I learned earlier on in my career. I listened to the people that I worked for. I came right out of college, and a lot of my peers as officers in the Air Force thought they were smarter than the enlisted people. Well, you aren't. You're right out of college. You got a lot to learn. There are a lot of people who've been doing it a lot longer than us. We needed to listen, and I listened. I listened to what they told me. And they were the ones that helped me out. They didn't help out the guys that were obnoxious and condescending. They helped the people out that asked questions and weren't afraid to ask questions. And that helped me grow. It makes it important for you to want to understand what people's motivations are and why they want to do what they do. And I always made sure to listen. Listen is a critical element to success. It's not always about talking. It's about listening too. And making sure you understand what's working and what's not working, because I guarantee you, whatever you learn along the way, you can use that and take it to the next place that you go, but it's not always going to work. And if you don't have that flexibility to change and try something different, you're going to get stuck in a routine over and over and over again. And education is critical. Don't let it stop with your undergraduate. Keep going. And not just with graduate and even PhD programs. I'm talking about going to conferences and learning about things, learning about new technologies, taking other courses. You know, one of the things I had to learn was about, I had never really worked much with Japan. And I had to learn a lot about the culture and a lot of the customs. And how do you communicate and talk to the Japanese so that I could connect better with them when I had to travel to Japan. So I understood, you know, what was important to them versus what might be more important in the US. Very different styles of operating. So the learning and the education never ends. And I would encourage you to continue that as you go throughout your careers, is make sure that you know that one thing is constant is change. And I hope that you've learned a little bit from me today. I know I enjoyed talking with you, but I wanted to leave some time for questions because I've had a pretty long career and I've learned a lot as I've gone along the way, and I'm happy to share that with you, especially about either Aflac or myself, and I wanted to open it up to questions. Yes, we got one back there. Oh, okay, there we go.
Two questions for you, actually. All right, I have two questions for you, actually.
Sure.
The first one is about your experience changing positions throughout your career. How did you handle some of the perceptions or attitudes that the employer or company you were leaving might have had about you taking your skills with you?
The perception that my company had about me leaving or taking my skills with me, I think it depended on the company, because some of the changes happened because the company was either downsizing. That's always one of the challenges. Another is because I had a better opportunity and the company that I was in didn't have that kind of opportunity. I think being in technology, a lot of people recognize that that was a career field in an area that people typically moved around a lot in and didn't stay with the same company. Because you would hit a wall. You'd have places where people had been in that job for 15 years. You were never going to get into management unless you punched the clock and served 15 years. I didn't want to wait 15 years. And that's what I learned, is I have to be willing to take risks and try other things. And I think, you know, with my employer, I never burned a bridge. That was another key thing, because every one of those people I worked for was going to be a potential reference for me. And to make sure that you left on good terms. I always put together a succession plan. I made sure someone was trained in what I did. I made sure that I had operating procedures for how I did what I did, so that the transition was smooth and easy. And I made myself available when I left. If you have questions for me, I'm happy you can call me at any time. You can reach me and I'll be happy to help solve that problem. And so always keep that door open. That's one of the things that helped me, and most of the people that I worked for in my career are references for me today.
All right, thank you. My second question was about what you mentioned about work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
What is your perspective on placing a high priority on work-life balance and how that can affect a person's ability to rise through the ranks in an environment that historically associates success and ambition with a lack of a work-life balance?
Exactly, and that's a great question about work-life balance, because one of the hard things for people, especially for women, is how do you have a family and continue to move up your career? And I did work for a company that they were not going to promote you if you didn't have someone, a spouse or someone, to take care of the family for you, the kids for you. You were not going to move up if you had someone who was in the same position or working just like you. And that was a tough job. That was a tough situation to be in, and recognize that their standards were not necessarily the same as mine or of the other people in there. And I think that as a country, we've gotten better at that. I know what I faced when I went through it. It was a lot tougher. But I look at my own organization now where I'm at, and most of the people I work with, most of the women in leadership and even the men in leadership, they're very actively involved in the community and their families' lives. That you have to recognize that a happy person means you're going to do a better job. Now, not to say that people don't wind up working at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night after they put the kids to bed. They might do a last-minute check of the emails or first thing in the morning. But I found the companies recognizes that you have to give a little leeway to people. Otherwise, there are other places that are doing it. They don't have to go work for you. And this is a huge thing for us to recognize, that we have to put more value on it, because I know it's important to people that are coming into the workforce, is nobody wants to put in what we baby boomers did. I got to be honest with you. When I first started out in my career, I was putting in 60 to 80 hours a week. It wasn't very conducive for a work-life balance. And one of the reasons why I'm at Aflac now is I reached a point for me, I'm having to deal with the reverse of having to deal with children, but dealing with parents and elder parents. And they take a lot of time and energy. And I'm lucky enough to work for an organization that recognizes and respects that and lets me deal with things when I need to deal with them. And I would encourage to make sure that's a question you ask, and you understand the company culture, because every company culture is different. Like, I don't think I'd go to Google right now, personally. It sounds great, but they have a reputation as a sweatshop. And it's making sure you find the right company culture that works for you. And you will see that out there when you do your investigation on the company. There's a lot of information to tell you about it. It's not just about what people say to you, but it's the questions you ask in your interview, to get a sense for, does your boss have a family? What kind of things do they do outside of work? If they don't have an answer for you, maybe that's not the right company. Yes.
Hey, Julia. So my question is, given that you've realized that working in a company that values ethics is very important for you, moving forward, if you were to move to a company that did not value ethics as much, but given that you currently hold a leadership position, how would you go about implementing that change in this new organization?
That's a great question about how you implement change in getting ethics in the culture. Well, a lot of it stems from the top. That's the reality. And if you're finding that you're working for someone that doesn't seem to care about the sweatshop environment, or doesn't seem to care about the customer, you have to ask yourself, is this really where you want to be? It's tough, because I think in my problem that I went through in my career is one of the reasons I changed jobs a lot, not only for promotion perspective, but was a fit perspective. I might have gone into a company and got hired by someone I really liked working for, but inevitably, because of all the rotation, that manager may move on and another one comes in. That's not the manager I interviewed with. That wasn't necessarily what I signed up for. He had different values, or she had different values than I did. It was time to move on. And that's partly what you have to gauge. Changing it is a whole nother structure. I mean, you have to put in the practices in place. And part of that for me was to let people know, you got to lighten up a little bit. You got to connect with your people. You can't be standing up on a pedestal. You got to understand what their pain points are, and getting people out and talking to their employees and understanding and getting feedback from the employees and taking it seriously. I think a lot of times people do employee engagement surveys and they ignore them. They don't actually look at them to say, okay, what's really the pain point here, and what are we doing to solve that pain point? How can we make it better? And if one of them is a question about work-life balance, that people feel like they're working too many long hours and they're not able to spend time with their family, then you got to figure out how to solve that problem. And you've got to get engaged people at all levels, not just me alone as one person can't. My team has to be able to do it, and they have to be able to drive it down to their managers. That's part of what you can do to affect change. Changing your peers is another story. That can be difficult, but you know, you have to make sure that you've got someone backing you on this. You're not going to be able to do it alone. It's got to be a joint effort and a team effort.
I have a question over there.
Yes.
My question has to do with leadership development. Given your time in the U.S. Air Force and given your several positions in organizations, what can you tell us about the similarities and differences for leading self, leading others, leading innovation in the different kinds of places where you've been in leadership?
Yeah, leadership is interesting in the Air Force. People assume that military people are very hierarchical. And that's the style of leadership. It's top down. Oddly enough, that's not what it is. It's very collaborative. It's very much servant leadership. It's recognizing it's a lot easier to get your team to follow you up the hill than to push them up the hill. And giving people orders is not necessarily the best way to do it. So I think I want to make sure people understand that military leadership isn't necessarily what I think a lot of people might have that perception about that it is. For me, one of the things that, like I said, when I learned to talk to the chief master sergeants and I learned to talk to even the civilian employees and listen to what they had to say, it was more about getting their ideas and putting that together and helping put together the best solution for whatever problem we were trying to tackle. And that's kind of how I approach leadership is you need to make sure that you build the right team and the right group of people. And it's situational. Every place you go into has different needs. Sometimes there are issues with the employee morale. Sometimes there's issues with the operational aspect that you're not efficient. You've got to figure out what each problem is that you have and start to solve and tackle it and work with your team to identify where do you have gaps and fill them. Because no place is the same, no place is identical. I can tell you that everywhere I've gone, everything has been different. There's always, nothing is routine in that process. Some of the problems may be the same, but the solutions are vastly different. And you've got to have that openness to listen to people who have ideas from all walks, not just your direct reports. If you don't have a conduit to all levels of your organization so that you're getting the feedback, you're always going to have a little bit of it filtered. And you can't make decisions if you don't have the information available to you. So I think that from a leadership perspective, the military was very grounding for me to teach me about that collaboration process. And the different jobs that I had, I was blessed to work for an organization, GE, that had a major investment in training and continuous training from a leadership perspective that probably taught me more about leadership, even more so than the military, because the military also provided a lot of training to do that. So I think that's an important aspect for leadership development is making sure that a company has the programs that will continue to grow you, because each stage of your career, there are different things that you need to learn. The thing that makes you very good at being a project manager in IT doesn't necessarily make you good at being a program manager where you're having to matrix into other people, and that doesn't necessarily make you very good at being a vice president of a division. All different skill sets are required, and you have to grow and adapt along the way and learn to fix the problem areas and grow from that. And that comes a lot of times with training and education and open ears.
Yeah, hi. You've talked a little bit about how to stay ethically engaged with your employees, but I was wondering, how do you think staying engaged with your customers in the community so that you're not always coming up with the answer to problems but implementing solutions on the front end? How do you think that plays into ethics?
In terms of how do you listen to the voice of the customer? How do you listen to what
kind of
people are looking for?
preemptively staying in touch with the needs and desires of your customers and their communities.
How we stay in touch with our customers and our communities. One of the things that Aflac has is we have a very large field sales organization. And most of these agents are active members of their local communities because they're selling to small businesses. That's who a lot of Aflac's target audience is. So they have to be engaged and have that kind of relationship. They have a direct conduit to us in headquarters. It's not, we talk to the field all the time. They're the ones that give us ideas about what customers are interested in, what kind of products do they want to see, how do they want to interact with us, How do they want to be able to communicate with us? What do they want to see on the web? What do they want to see from the phone, mobile apps? We get a lot of that feedback on what's working, what's not working from our field, because as I said, we have 75,000 field agents. So we've got a fairly large voice of the customer that, believe me, they call me all the time. So I hear a lot from them on how to deal with that. And so it's been very helpful. I personally go out and meet with a lot of these field agents. I go to their meetings, their regular meetings, and I get their feedback, because rather than have it go all the way up this chain, cross over and come all the way down, it's like the game of telephone. You never know what was originally communicated and what it wound up in my ear if I don't talk directly to that individual. And I think it's the same way for employees. You got to do the same thing, is make sure that you're out there talking to people and listening to their feedback and understanding what it is that is important to them. You just can't hide in an office. That's the key.
I was going to ask you a question about your experience traveling and working in Japan as a woman in leadership in a culture where the leadership is predominantly male. Can you tell us a story or give an example of your experience in Japan as a woman in leadership?
This is a great question. I think one of the things that we're challenged by is the model in Japan for women in leadership. They are not married and they don't have children. And that's one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome as a company, to say that, look, you can choose to have a family and continue on in the workplace, but they're still dealing with that culture of, I've got to be in the office until the boss leaves. I've got to be in the office before the boss comes. And to top it off, they have an hour-and-a-half commute each way in the direction of their home. Many times they have to go out and go socialize with their boss. So from my perspective, when I'm dealing with the Japanese environment, I deal with more of the executive levels, but it's more about understanding. Honestly, one of the things that I do is I typically wear pants. I don't wear a dress. I tend to wear bright colors as opposed to the dark suits, because they already know I'm different anyway. Gaijin. So they recognize that. And, it's just so that I just be who I am. But you have to understand how to interact with them and not insult them, and be careful not to do that. It's just knowing and recognizing that you're going to be a little different. And frankly, the struggles that we have are very much culturally related, and the guys have them as much as I do that have to interact with Japan. It's just in a communication mechanism. But I don't go out drinking. I don't go out to the karaoke bars like the guys do. That's just not part of the process. And you just have to recognize that you're never going to quite be there until culturally they start to accept it. And luckily their prime minister has been very active in trying to push Womenomics, which is a program to get women recognized and moved further up in that. And Aflac's taken a huge opportunity to work with him and his program for that. And we've actually been doing a lot of diversity activities to help encourage up-and-comers and recognize them and get them engaged, sometimes bringing them to the US, giving them an opportunity to see how things work in the US, and then bringing them back so that they can take some of that challenge with them. But it is going to be tough. I mean, they're 40 years behind us in terms of accepting women in leadership. Long way to go. Yes.
Hey, Julia. You talked a little bit about ethics and values, both intercompany and as well as customer-facing,
Right.
having ethics and values in those dealings. Can you talk a little bit about the importance for you, and maybe how you look at your suppliers, companies that you deal with, and maybe what you do to to investigate or to research? Is this a company that I want to work with?
Right. Well, working with vendors, every culture and every company that you deal with, you do have different cultures. We have a large organization that does sourcing and procurement that helps us vet some of these customers. So they put them through a rigorous screening to make sure they're obviously they have ethical dealings. We have very tight controls in place, because I think sometimes there are people that will get into relationships with vendors, and we were one of those companies that did have a problem with this, where people would get set in their ways and used to working with the same vendor over and over and over again, and never really let anybody else get that opportunity to enter into a relationship. That's where our strategic sourcing and procurement office comes in. They make sure we're following standards. They're the neutral third party. It's not a personal relationship between anyone that's having the relationship with the vendor, they kind of act as that liaison for all the relationships that we do. And they're the ones that vet the customers to make sure this is somebody that we want to do business with, that has the same standards that we do. So that's a little bit about the process that we work with, is making sure you have an operation and an organization that can do that. Somebody back in the back?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
There are a number of students in this room. Many of them will be in a leadership position, if not 10 years, maybe 15 years from now. And they may find themselves in a position where they may have to make a business decision, which may have, which could be made in an ethical way or unethical way, depending upon the situation. Do you have any suggestions of what we can do in a business school while they're still in school to help shape their values, so to speak, so that when those opportunities come where they have to make decisions that have ethical implications, so they make the right ones?
You know, that's an interesting question, because the challenge is we're so much in business is all about the bottom line. You know, and you're teaching business and you're saying, okay, it's about profit and loss, it's how do you make money. A lot of times I think we left out that equation of how do you make money ethically, because sometimes it's easier to make money unethically. And I think history has shown us that. But the bottom line is you have to ask yourself, is this decision that I'm making something I want to see on the Wall Street Journal? That's some of the levers that I think we employ is this something that is going to make us look bad? Is this something that could potentially affect our stock price, which we aren't going to get recover back from that when we're making this decision, just because we're going for that quick fix? And that's the kind of questions we have to ask ourselves. I think from a business perspective, I really encourage the B schools to have an ethics program and talk about what that means, because sometimes making those decisions, the example I gave is paying claims in one day does not make us as much money as paying claims in 30 days. We will make more money if we sit on the cash and we let interest accumulate. But think about what it's done from our value recognition. We're the only insurance company on the most ethical companies. When you compare us with our peers, when the stock market dips, we don't swing as low as they do. We always are a lot steadier. That's the kind of stuff that I think we've got to start to educate people in. And I think that's where Ethisphere comes in with some of the statistics and the data that they have, is sharing that to say that in the long run, an ethical company will outperform one that doesn't make the list. That's what the data tells us. That's the kind of stuff we need to make sure people understand.
Actually, I had a follow-up to that chart that I'd like to ask you. You showed the chart where the ethical companies were outperforming the ones that were not so ethical. Could it be that the ethical companies are such because their products are so superior they do not have to be unethical to perform well, whereas the unethical companies are in a position where they're at a competitive disadvantage, so they make unethical decisions to improve their performance? Is it, in other words, are you suggesting that it's causative, that the ethical companies, because they're ethical, that causes the better performance? Or are we just talking about a correlation that could be explained?
There's definitely a correlation between it. I mean, you look at all the values that we talked about, it wasn't always about just the ethics. I mean, it's obviously the quality is important, service is important. There are other factors that go into it that you want to make sure that you're incorporating in your products. But I don't think that, for example, I use Volkswagen. People always thought of them as a great product, a good quality product. Definitely a reliable product, service product, great marketing campaign. But nobody knew behind the scenes what was going on. And so it's not always about that. I mean, I think that they go hand in hand. It definitely is something that there's a definitely correlation between the two, I would say. You know, I think that it's more than just being ethical. It's also, you got to have a good product. That's for sure.
Julia, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.